On today's show, we continue to talk Mets prospects. Why is Alex Ramirez still a top 15 prospect in the Mets system? Why is Kevin Parada not? And so much more. We'll break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. And speaking of Just Baseball, I have Aram Leighton on today's show. Again, this is a 3-part episode. Yesterday's show, we discussed the top 5 prospects in the Mets system, Christian Scott being the big part of our discussion because Aram is higher on Scott than any outlet out there. So we spent a lot of time on him, as well as Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, Luisangel Acuna, and Ryan Clifford. So if you missed that show, go back, watch that one. That's part 1. Today for part 2, we're discussing all the other position player prospects. Alex Ramirez, Kevin Parada, Ronald Hernandez. Which of those two guys is the better catching prospect, Parada or Hernandez? That's a really interesting discussion. We talk about Collin Houck and Jeremy Rodriguez, some really young shortstops in the Mets farm system that have a ton of upside and are considered top 10 prospects by Aram. We also spent a little bit of time at the end discussing Brett Baty and whether we experienced a little bit of prospect fatigue here where people gave up on him too soon. So really interesting discussion from the viewpoint of a prospect analyst that at one point had Brett Baty as one of the top 20 prospects in the game. So without further ado, here is part 2 of my conversation with Aram Leighton. There's a few other position player prospects I want to run through, and then there's a lot of arms in this system. Let's talk quick about Alex Ramirez. You know, he's included in your top 15, got him at number 13. And what's interesting is you talked about on the call up how Ramirez, the reason why he's still a top 15 guy is you see a big league role. So can you kind of shed some light on that, how he could be a valuable piece and why the Mets added him to the 40-man roster this offseason, which was a little bit surprising to some.
Yeah, I mean, when we're ranking these guys, a big part of it is, okay, what does that future role look like? And, even though there's a ton of volatility here, there's a reason why, as you mentioned, that they added him to the 40-man, which was there's a future role here, even if the bat continues to be frustrating. I think you can tell that the bat is just going to continue to be frustrating, though he has worked and made some adjustments, as you showed me and kind of clued me into, working out in the Dominican, all through the season and trying to shorten up. And I think that's helped him crush fastballs at the very least. I think there's always going to be too much slack to that swing. The approach is not great, and secondary stuff's probably going to chew him up for the most part. But he can fly. He's a great defender in all 3 spots, and when he runs into baseballs, he can really hit them. So I kind of see that like Jake Marisnick type of role, and that's a guy that is valuable at the end of the day, and a guy that you want to have. So that's a future role player and a top 15 prospect and a decent system. You never know. He's still 21, so there could be some continued refinement, and he could find something. But I feel as though you can be pretty confident that at the very least, you got a 4th outfielder here that can impact the game with the glove and run into some baseballs and give you enough.
When I made my top 10, I almost, and this is why I'm not a prospect evaluator, I felt the pressure from the audience knowing that if I left Kevin Parada off the top 10, some of the fans would be outraged. And so I kind of went against what I ultimately feel about the players and put Parada over Ramirez. And I think that was a mistake on my part. When it comes to future value, Ramirez, you see, like you said, a 4th outfielder at least. With Kevin Parada, I think it's harder to find that role. I know you're really down on Parada. There's a lot of outlets that still have him in the top 10, probably because, he was a high draft pick and we're still looking at what he did in college. But what about Parada has you so down on him compared to other outlets?
It's, as you kind of alluded to, just right into that future role thing. There's in a vacuum, I probably believe in Parada's bat a little bit more, even though he whiffs more. There's a little bit more track record. He elevates, he hits the ball harder, but there's a lot of whiff there, man. I mean, it's bad contact rates. You could palate that if he was a good defensive catcher and say, okay, maybe the offense will come along later. He's not a good defensive catcher, and the bat, like, okay, if he's not a great defensive catcher, well, a lot of the top prospects that we see, like, oh, is he going to stick behind the dish? Those guys rake, right? Like those are guys that really hit, and you say, okay, well, we'll move him to another position and he'll still keep swinging it. I struggle to find a role for Parada, because if he's frustrating swing and miss guy who runs into some homers, yeah, that's maybe a platoon bat, but where's he playing defensively? If he's not a good defensive catcher, which I don't think he is, the receiving's not very good. It's gotten a little bit better, but it's not very good. The arm's not great. What's the role? It's below average defensive catcher and then a volatile high whiff bat. If he was a good defensive catcher, you could say, okay, power backup guy. If you could even play an average catcher, you'd say, okay, a guy that could split time and platoon a little bit. But I just don't see what the role is, because there's not enough offensively there to say, okay, well, he can hit his way to another spot. And then there's not enough defensively to say, okay, that takes some pressure off the bat. I think he's just kind of stuck right now. There's still time, but for me, I don't see that role, and I don't know if I'm going to see enough changing there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that too. Like if the bat was better, and you could say, all right, first baseman, okay, but if he's not even hitting enough at the position he's at, first base, you really need a bat. So yeah, Parada's a guy that fans have been so high on because of where he was drafted, because of the name recognition that comes with that. But the numbers have not been there. I know this year he started off hot. Maybe that'll continue, but a guy that when I look at catching prospects in this system, I think I said this on my show at one point after I had him at 10, where I was like, honestly, they just signed Giovanni Rodriguez, and we can touch on him a little bit, but I know we still haven't seen much on him. I've said that I like Ronald Hernandez more. And it's funny because then I was listening to the call-up today, and you said exactly the same thing. Ronald Hernandez is the second prospect they got back in the David Robertson trade, but it seems like he really is just off to a great start to his career, put up great numbers in the complex, now playing well in St. Lucie and Low A. What do you see with Hernandez that leads you to believe, hey, even backup catcher, in the future, but a guy that, really has a well-rounded game?
Yeah, he still has some ways to go defensively, but he's younger and has more time to do that. And I think, has a little bit more going for him there. And then on top of that, switch hitter, good feel to hit. I think he's going to grow into more power. So I just think there's that more, like you said, more well-rounded game that you can say, okay, that guy can kind of do everything pretty well and turn into, an everyday catcher. It's easier to kind of dream on that. I just really like the feel to hit for a younger guy. And I think the power is continuing to come, and the defense has gotten better each time I check in. But I think as a switch hitter with the well-rounded offensive game, there's at least some sort of a fallback, because kind of tying a bow on the Parada conversation. What's interesting is, like we just talked about Vientos, use that as an example, right? If Kevin Parada this year between AA and AAA hit 280 with 24 home runs, everybody would be amped, right? 130 WRC plus, strikes out 28.6% of the time. Everybody would be absolutely amped. That was Mark Vientos. And we still can't find a spot for Vientos at the big league level. And I would be floored beyond belief if Parada did that offensively. So I just wanted to throw that point in there as well. But just going back to Hernandez, I thought that was a great get for them for Robertson, ridiculous. But yeah, I think it's just a lot of different things in his game that already look pretty advanced for his age that, could give him a really well-rounded catching, profile.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die. You always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Last note on the position players in the Mets system here. I want to look at the shortstops. Two of them in the top 10 as far as future guys, kind of the next wave beyond the Williams and the Acuñas. Collin Houck and Jeremy Rodriguez. And first, I want to start with Rodriguez. I think he might have even been a player to be named later in the Tommy Pham trade. I don't even remember if we got the name right away. But, I mean, shot up prospect boards this offseason. I know you've seen some video too. What has everyone all of a sudden just jumping all over Jeremy Rodriguez, the guy that is really interesting to watch?
Yeah, I take DSL data with a grain of salt, but when it's that good, you got to lock in a little bit more. And he was posting some of the best contact rates in the Dominican Summer League, and he posted some of the lowest chase rates in the Dominican Summer League. Then you look at the swing, really advanced, smooth, geared for line drives the ball to all fields. The power's non-existent at this point, but that's okay. He's 17 and has some room in the frame. And I think just being able to dream on a little bit more physically, you just don't see hitters that young, that advanced with the knowledge of the strike zone like that, and then be able to repeat their move so well in the box. I mean, feel for the barrel to get to different locations and just such a smooth swing. It's easy to bet on that, even if he doesn't physically, mature the way that you hope. It's a plus hit tool. I think you can dream on. I think plus plate discipline, and then some good actions in the middle infield as well. So even if he's not a surefire shortstop, a great second baseman, I think he can turn into some good instincts out there too. The arm strength's a little weak, but I think that can all kind of come together. So I think it's a little bit of speculation of like, hey, if this guy, fills out a little bit and gains a little bit of explosion, he's going to go nuclear. And I think it's kind of trying to get ahead of that. But I also think the floor is underrated because you just don't get to say floor very often with 17-year-old DSL guys. And I also think it's a sign of a changing of the guard with the Mets farm system, front office development. I mean, the Mets used to be the team that gets fleeced in these types of deals, right? And now they're the ones that are plucking really good prospects at the lower levels and having these scouting successes. I think it's a sign of good things to come for the Mets.
Billy Epler is going to get a lot of flack for his 2-year tenure. I actually thought he did a great job as the GM of the Mets, honestly. And the way he handled that deadline, whether it's of just him or the people in the Mets front office that they've been building over, because this is 3 years running that the Mets have been trying to get this operation off the ground. And they really just hit a home run at the deadline with all of these different prospects they added. And we talk about your top 15. If we can try to count them out here, you got Gilbert, Clifford, Acuna, Rodriguez, and that's 4 of the top 15 acquired at the deadline. I feel like I might even be missing a 5th one. Marco Vargas, and he was a player to watch, but still, I mean, Vargas and Hernandez top 20. If you expand it out, you're talking 6 at least of the top 20 prospects in this system acquired at one deadline. So it really is amazing the work that the Mets did. I wrote an article for us at the time. The Mets just bought a rebuild in a week, and that's what happened. Last player to note, first round pick last year, Collin Houck, 2-way star, could have played college football. That always gets people excited. What are you most looking at when he now makes the full transition to pro baseball this year?
Just to look a little bit more hitterish. I think when you look at the swing mechanics, they're there. Like you can see the ingredients. And we were talking about it on the episode, but like the thing that stands out to me is he looks like a guy that is like thinking about what he's working on a little bit. And you mentioned a 2-sport athlete, and you see it though, like shortstop wise, I think you can be a good shortstop. You see the athleticism. The swing though, I look at it and I'm like, he should not be striking out that much. There's not that much wasted movement, but it's a little slow. It's a little mechanical sometimes. So I really do feel like this year for Houck, I'm not really looking at the results too much. I want to see improvements as the year goes on, but I do think that this was kind of understood as a little bit more of a project later in the first round. You're taking a multi-sport athlete, and it might not happen right away in terms of, it might be a somewhat disappointing year this year. I think the power is going to be better than people think because he's, it's going to be suppressed a little bit in the Florida State League, but I think you can dream on average hit, above average power, and a chance to stick it short. I just think there's a lot that has to happen, and I think it's only going to happen from reps. So for me, it's just kind of looking for him to become a little bit more of a natural hitter, and I think that'll come. But right now, he just seems like he's feeling things out a lot in the box. That said, I was really impressed with the defensive tape, and I think he can be a really well-rounded player. But that feel to hit's got to come along.
One little kind of aside, Brett Baty having a really good start to this season. I want to talk to you a little bit about prospect fatigue, because we see these guys They hit the show. If they aren't great right away, fan bases are just out on them. And we're seeing MJ Melendez with the Royals, kind of a similar situation. How long do you give a top prospect when they get up to really make that evaluation? How many years, how many at bats, like how long before you're going to be out on someone like Brett Baty, who was, pretty close to consensus top 20 when it came to prospect status going into last season, and one bad year, people out on him. Now we're seeing all of a sudden defensively, he looks great. He's playing confident. He hasn't quite tapped into power yet, but he's at least hitting over 300 in the big leagues to start this season. So I feel like people quit on him way too early, and now we're seeing he can really show a lot of people that they were wrong this season.
Yeah, I think it's case by case, but in a case like Brett Baty's, multiple seasons. Like, as much as people don't want to hear it, and like, yeah, maybe there's some setting him back and forth. And if it was ugly this year, then I'd start to phase him out and maybe look at him as a change of scenery candidate. But I didn't really change my assessment on Brett Baty after last year. There was points where it was like, okay, this doesn't look great. I might need to dive into it. But then I look at the swing mechanics, look at it looked pretty good. Talk about another guy that kind of felt like he was feeling things out at times in the box and then trying to elevate more and then getting away from just kind of who he is. I know we want Baty to elevate, but there's guys that have success, with 48, 50% ground ball rates if they hit the ball extremely hard. Brett Baty hits the ball extremely hard. So I think he's just kind of figuring out how to improve a little bit in terms of being able to tap into the game power, but also not get away from who he was, which was a guy with a level swing that just hit line drives hard. And I think he's been getting back to hitting line drives hard. And I think the power will come along later as he gets more comfortable again. But I think this is a perfect example of why you need, a lot of times with really talented guys, sometimes it's going to take 400 or 500 plate appearances. But I also think it's relative, right? If there's guys getting blown up, you can start to say, okay, maybe this is a different situation. We might need to look elsewhere. Baty wasn't playing well, but it wasn't like he was looking like lost up there or getting absolutely dismantled. I didn't see a guy that, there was stretches maybe where it looked like that, but overall, he looked like a guy that was a couple adjustments away from settling in. So it's case by case, but for guys like Baty that aren't getting absolutely dismantled, I give him, 400 or 500 plate appearances before I'm really giving up, because he's just too talented. Hits the ball way too hard and makes too much contact for me to give up on someone like that.
I think the thing that's jumped out to me with Brett Baty, we saw it, trying to remember the year 2021 to 2022. 2022 is when he had the huge season in AA. It was working on a specific thing and getting much better. It was the defense and then lifting a little more. And then he talked about it this spring training, how he felt like he got weak with his top hand last year, and how after the season, which was a mental drain on him, the Mets were not a fun team to be a part of last year at all. And there was a lot of pressure put on his shoulders to try to lift a team that was struggling. So he took a week off, didn't pick up a bat, watched a lot of video, talked with the hitting coaches, found out that it was his top hand that was a little bit weak. He wanted that to get stronger through the zone. Spent the entire offseason working on that top hand. And now you're seeing the results. And I think you've got to just give someone with this much talent time to make adjustments, particularly at this level.
I love that you mentioned that, because that top hand's kind of what made him so good in just being quick to the ball, hitting elevated fastballs, those line drives. And last year, 25% in-zone whiff rate on fastballs. That's just not what we're used to seeing from him. For reference, small sample, but so far this year, he's cut that in half. It's a 12.5% in-zone whiff rate on four-seam fastballs. So he's getting the stuff at the top, which that's all you're going to see. We just talked about induced vertical break. Like, that's what pitchers want to do. Now he's able to do that. He's getting back to what works for him.
And also, I had to check the numbers lately, but I've heard at times throughout this shit people saying Brett Baty's leading baseball in batting average against fastballs. So if that was the problem that he identified, seems like he's fixed it. And he, once again, looks like the starting third baseman of the future for the Mets. Accidentally hit the intro there. But looking like the starting third baseman for the Mets, which is a huge, huge thing. That's going to be all from part 2 of this 3-part episode, breaking down everything from Aram's top 15 prospects in the Mets system. Tomorrow's show's a really good one. We go through all the pitching prospects not named Christian Scott, because we talked about Scott in part 1 of this 3-part episode. So we discuss Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell. Which of those two guys does Aram value higher? Same thing with Mike Vassell and Dom Hamill. We also talk about a pop-up prospect here, Jonah Tong, who has really impressed and has caught Aram's eye, as well as Nolan McLean. the two-way player. So a lot of fun conversation there. You don't want to miss it. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, trying to make a push to 9,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who are subscribing. If you want to read about the top 15 prospects in the Mets system, you can find a link in the episode description, as well as a link to Aram's top 100 prospects. And as well, you can find our link for our texting service, the Locked On Mets Insiders. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first watch or your first listen every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube, to the first ever 24/7 streaming service that covers everything in the world of sports. Of course, we're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.